My process, like many others, started off with a composition idea. Mine was that there would be some kind of foggy cyberpunk alley with someone sitting in the middle, someone, lying down or sitting down or something. So I quickly sketched the scene using Blender's grease pencil object, which was locked to the perspective of the camera. So here's how the process went down. The first was blocking in perspective. Blocking was really pretty simple. It was just 2 blocks on either side and a floor. Then I recessed the walls on either side and then placed an array of columns that went to the end of the alley. Then I duplicated the collection, which I then flipped on the x-axis to mirror it. Now whenever I do something in the first collection, it mirrors to the other collection, but is also flipped. It's kind of like a link duplicate, but for the entirety of a collection. Now the only thing that's missing is collection modifiers. Yeah. The second part of the process was texturing, which was pretty simple. The hardest part of this process was trying to get a realistic wet concrete effect. I looked at a bunch of reference pictures and also looked at some tutorials to see how other people did the process, and it was kind of difficult to get what I wanted. After a lot of tweaking, I ended up with something I liked. The third step was lighting. It was mainly just a spotlight. All the lights in this scene are pretty much just spotlights and fog. I added a wall light asset that I had and added some emission to it. Then I paired it with the spotlight so that it would make contextual sense. This was actually the part where I realized that I didn't really like this composition. It looked a little bit too forced and I just didn't like it. So I decided to change it up a bit. I looked at the wet concrete and realized for it to actually work, I need to have something reflecting on it, either in the far end of the wall or something going down an alleyway. Now this is where I realized that if I changed the camera angle slightly, I had a lot more possibilities on what I could make. I changed the camera perspective from a side view past a brick column to a symmetrical shot going down the middle. In the middle, the alleyway would end and I would put something there. In the end, this ended up being the kind of tech creature. This meant a change of lighting. I tried to incorporate the blue with an interesting bit of red, and that kind of would have worked if I had a different composition and I had a main subject that was in the foreground. But since my subject was in the background, it was looking a little bit too muddy. There were 2 points of interest, which was making the whole composition confusing. So I changed everything to red, including the emission of the fog. Now it was time to move on to details. I added rain, but it really didn't make that big of a difference. And looking at the floor, I had to add puddles for it to actually make any sense. Now this is possible to do. There's many tutorials on it, but I didn't really want to go through all the trouble. Maybe in another futuristic cyberpunk render will I add rain. I added some cool no parking signs from an asset collection that I had and promptly realized that they didn't make any sense. So I removed their texture and replaced it with the general warning pattern that you would see on the side of a highway. For the sign in front, I transformed it into the more normal warning sign. Then I modeled a giant spike and drove it through the sign. It's not really visible in the final render, but it's cool. It's like someone went by and drove that spike in order to warn people that this thing was eating electricity. Little world building tidbits like that are always fun. Of course, then I added the wires. They went down everywhere, down the machine, on the floor, and every time I thought there was going to be too many wires, I added some more. And I really think I could have gotten away with a few more wires. With that, the render was pretty much done. Some final tweaks with lights and pipes and stuff, and I set a decent sample count and set it up to render. I set up the compositor for glare and lens distortion, then I took that image and put it into Krita, which I did some post-processing, which really was just boosting the exposure with the color curve and then adding some grain. And that's it. The final piece is really ominous. I like it a lot. Some kind of amalgamation of text that's sucking up electricity, as can be seen by the sign, doing something creepy. Here are some reflections that I had. Number 1 is focus on composition. See, the main problem that I had here was that my composition was limiting me. As soon as I changed the camera angle, I had a lot of other ideas that suddenly just popped up. From now on, I'm going to test to see alternate compositions and what the story really needs. Number 2 relates to the first one, and it's to thumbnail. In 2D art, thumbnailing refers to the process of making a mini version of whatever the finished piece would look like. Usually this is done with just simple shades. This allows for experimentation as well as getting the feel of a piece down really quickly. The thing is, when you're working with 3D or even 2D and you have a canvas that's easily editable, thumbnailing kind of goes on the back seat. I'm not going to start thumbnailing 2D wise for my 3D work, but making the viewport smaller, like a thumbnail, will hopefully help me experiment better. Hey, thanks for watching this video. This is part 1 of a series of videos where I talk about some of the reflections that I have while making some of my artworks. Now, this isn't going to be like a course or anything, because I'm not a professional artist, I'm just a hobbyist. But I think that looking at the process of how I make stuff and looking at the reflections will help me, and hopefully help you, be better at art.